town, the parish, are there to help. If we've got detailed knowledge within our wards, please don't. I know it's always easy to start at the top, which is good, but don't forget that we're very often really aware and actually know the street and where you live and things like that. You should come to us with them if you have an issue.
I mean, I do, I am in the process of learning about the constituency, and there are 77,000 people who can. Yeah, of course we. No, I'm just saying. I'm thanking you for what you've just said. It's not as if I'm not interested in knowing about the constituency. I'm just trying to suggest to you, trying to balance that process and balance trying to understand the constituency with the multitude of pretty complex issues that we're encountering at Westminster, which I want to participate in and want to understand. There's only so much I can do, I have a capacity, and and as Peter rightly says, I rely upon local councillors to feed in about particular issues in particular wards, because I've only been a candidate 3 years this month, and if you think about how complex the constituency is, I mean, I go as far as Tally-Ho pub that was on the other side of Finchampstead, all the way to pretty much just along here in the Borbrook. It's a pretty diverse part of Berkshire. There's lots of different issues to grapple with, and there are 44,000 homes, so the idea that I'm going to be knocking on 44,000 homes immediately, it's not going to happen. We're in the process of doing a sort of rota of going around all the constituency, but I suspect it can probably take me the best part of 10 to 15 years to get around most of the constituency. That's just the reality of how difficult it is. But don't think I'm not trying to, because I am. Paul.
Thanks, Philip. I think it might be useful just mentioning, because I guess many people in this room don't know, that you do meet with the executive councillors on a regular basis, and you very kindly give us your take on what's happening nationally and what we're likely to be, what's likely to be coming down the pipe at us. And we in turn give you the local flavour on issues and warn you, I guess, of things that constituents might begin to write to you about. So there is that liaison already, which I think you would agree is a good way of working together to serve the people that we all serve. I'd also just like to mention that local authorities do have various mechanisms for taking councillors who are basically, when they first give up their time to be elected, they are willing but basically untrained. And throughout the 4 years of administration, we all the way through that 4 years dedicate one Monday a month to a member improvement programme, because we understand that when a resident, which that's what we all are, becomes a councillor, they are not necessarily an expert on children's services or adult services or finance or whatever. And so by running these training evenings, which I have to say on behalf of my members, they turn up, and the attendance in Bracknell Forest is actually, I believe, one of the highest in percentage terms of any council in the country. And so we do try to give colleagues that information. We often have external facilitators in for that, and so that's what we do. Now I know that nationally, unfortunately, that there's not the same facilities available, but maybe that's something that you could lead the charge on.
No. I mean, it's good to hear that. I mean, I have that relationship with Bracknell Forest. Don't forget, I also have working with Borough as well that I have to liaise with. So there were two councils that I have to liaise with because of where the boundaries are. at Westminster, it is quite remarkable actually how you have to sort of become an expert, in inverted commas, on some issues quite quickly. And I contribute quite a lot to the Energy and Climate Change Select Committee. You might not know this, but I was the main reason that the number of environmental consultants on deep sea oil rigs was doubled. Your Member of Parliament secured that. And you might say, well, how come? And it's, well, because I contributed extensively to you remember the Macondo oil rig disaster in the Gulf. Well, I made an impact and made a point of saying, well, look, if we're doing this over here, we need to have better practices in place. And as a result, as a direct result of my intervention and my work, I doubled the number of environmental consultants on deep sea oil rigs in an attempt to try and prevent Macondo oil explosion taking place in British waters. Now, you might say, well, is that necessarily a priority? I would say, well, it wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for me. And the fact that I actually took some trouble to learn about the issue. And that is a classic example of the fact that members of Parliament need to have the time to be able to work on issues of a national consequence. And I think it's in the best interests of the country. And I'm pleased that the local government in this area is strong. It's well recognised that local government in this area, the way in which it goes about its business, compared to a national standard, is very high. We're very fortunate in that regard, both the councils that I cover. And so we have less of an issue around here. I certainly know that some of my parliamentarians have much more demands placed upon them because their local government is not so good. I am fortunate in that. But I do think that it's important that democratically elected people are holding organisations in all sectors to account, be it education, be it health, etc. And you can only do that if you free those democratically elected people to become informed enough to hold those organisations to account. Because when you start looking at what's gone wrong in the past, not just recently, in the past, be it in education or in health, social care, or in foreign affairs policy, or in defence, or whatever, if we're to prevent that happening, you need to get people involved who are actually asking the questions, who are actually saying, no, that's not right, that's got to change. People who are prepared to take responsibility in the process, not just keep pushing the responsibility onto quangos, non-elected authorities, actually having ministerial responsibility for decision-making, God forbid. And you can only have that if the ministers are in a position and have the time in order to be able to do that. And I think it is quite remarkable that I often see ministers who are having to do all of the casework as well as of their constituencies and doing all of those things that are expected of them as well as being ministers. This is why I found it quite interesting, quite intriguing that I made it very clear from the outset that I was going to stay working as a doctor. That I was going to do it part-time, that I was going to do no more than a day a week across the course of the year. And there have been some people, admittedly a small number of people, who have said, quote, this means he's a part-time MP. He can't be doing the job properly. And it's like, well, hang on a minute. So presumably the Prime Minister is a part-time MP of Whitby. Presumably the Foreign Secretary is a part-time MP in Richmond and Yorkshire. Presumably the Defence Secretary is a part-time MP in Runnymede. Presumably the Health Secretary is a part-time MP in South West Surrey. I could go on. Or are we suggesting that being a Health Secretary is a part-time job? Or being the Defence Secretary is a part-time job? Or the Foreign Secretary? Or, God forbid, the Prime Minister? Clearly this is nonsense, isn't it? Actually, the fact that you have an MP who is capable of also being a GP on a part-time basis, I think that's a good thing, I would suggest. And so I found it rather odd that I was attacked by some for doing that. I actually think it means that if and when, and don't hold your breath, I got the phone call to become a minister, it wouldn't be like it was an increase in workload, because I'm already doing those two things. But again, it does say a lot about the perception of what being an MP is about. This perception that somehow being an MP means that it precludes you from doing something else. Well, if being an MP precludes you from doing something else, you wouldn't have anybody being ministers in this country, and you'd have no one governing the country. And that obviously is stupid. Next question.
Going back to your point of not having a diversity of people apply to the MPs, I think you've argued it rather well. I think it's a good idea to have a diversity of people with a diversity of experience, which they require before becoming an MP, because they'll sharpen their critical faculties elsewhere.
Yeah.
And also, the example you've given about the oil rigs is an absolute classic, because if you didn't have a mixture of people, you wouldn't think to look and ask. I mean, I would far prefer to have the system we have, albeit with its disadvantages, than having a bunch of bureaucrats who've all been through, say, a centralised university course, which is the only recognised way of them standing to be MPs. So, yes, it's difficult. You have to work out how to learn things, but you've actually done something beforehand.
No, I think, it used to be that the reason the hours were structured the way they were was because invariably it was a man, so the professional man did his day's work, and then he wandered down to the House of Commons and sat in the chamber and contributed in debates. And that's how it was structured. It was not viewed as a profession in that way. It was viewed as public service duty, a sense of wanting to participate in the debate, and to participate in governing of the country, participation in governance of the country. And somehow, somewhere in the 80s and 90s, it seemed to change into becoming this sort of profession where you had to, or you didn't have to, but the expectation was you did a certain course at university, and then you became a researcher, an intern, and then you became a candidate, and you became a member of Parliament, and then you became a cabinet minister. And it's not that some of those people don't have something to offer, because clearly they're bright and able. But it does strike me, and it has struck me in the time I've been there, that the absence of wisdom at Westminster has surprised me. Wisdom, which is another way of describing that you've made lots of mistakes in life and learned from it. Essentially, that's what wisdom is. Some people are born wise, but the majority of us only become wise having cocked up a few times. And in order to cock up enough to become wise, you've got to be a bit older. And you've got to have lived. You've got to have gone out there, maybe had a family, or had a job, or had a profession, or set up a business that's failed, set up another business and failed, all those sort of things. Now, I don't think that it's good for governance that there are fewer people who have lived before, in inverted commas, before going into politics, or indeed continue to live having once got into politics. I remember one example. I did a GP surgery on Monday morning, which is when I traditionally do it in a week. And I spent the whole idea of being GP is about data, it's about putting information into computers. Those of you who've been to see your GP lately, you'll see us all tapping away, and it all goes into a computer. But all of it's being read-coded and collected. I don't know where this information goes. And so I did this, and then in the evening, in the afternoon, I got up to Westminster, and I had a meeting about 7 o'clock in the evening, sort of group meeting, and it was with a cabinet minister. And at this meeting, he asked for ideas for government efficiency, how to make things more efficient, how to save money. And everyone went around the room, and all the suggestions were quite narrow. They were all sort of clever, cute little ideas. And I sort of put my hand up and I said, just stop collecting data. And he sort of looked at me and I said, I spent the morning punching information into a computer. Stop collecting data. What purpose is it serving? I'm not sure that it's serving any purpose. And the software contracts, the IT contracts, the employment of administrative staff, it's rather like something out of Yes Minister. All of this is adding to the cost of governance. Stop doing it. Actually, it was the only thing he wrote down in the entire meeting. Now, I could not have had that insight if I hadn't been doing GP surgery that morning. It was because I sort of looked at it and thought, I just want to care for my patients. I don't want to just go looking for the code on the screen, trying to get it to be the right code, and trying to get the right this and the right that. And the amount of information you have to wade through in order just to give you amoxicillin, or just to give you whatever it is quite laughable. I mean, it is Orwellian. It's scary. So if you're going to address that, if you're going to try and deal with that nonsense in government and the amount of bureaucracy, data collection, everything else that's going on, you must have people in government who've lived and breathed it, who've screamed at the computer, who said, for crying out loud, just give me the prescription paper, for crying out loud. I just want to sign it. Indeed, why do we have prescription paper? Why do I have to go like this? What a nonsense. I just got to press a button and the stuff burps out in the next room. Why do you have prescription paper? What an absolute anachronistic. I mean, what a joke. I sign hundreds of these things. What a waste of time and money. What's the purpose of them? Indeed, what's the purpose of pharmacists? I don't know. Pharmacists I can understand, but pharmacies, why do we have pharmacies? I don't know. Don't know what they add to the system. Now, I wouldn't be able to say that without any sense of, understanding, without being a doctor. In fact, I can look at it and go, I'll get rid of that, and I'll get rid of that, get rid of that. Now, if you've just done PPE at Oxford, and you become an intern, you become a researcher, and you sort of gracefully sort of like sauntered through politics, how would you know that you could do without pharmacies? You wouldn't, would you? The fact they do without pharmacies in rural areas which don't have dispensing practices, how many of them are dispensing practices in Bracknell? I don't think there are any, are there? I'm not sure that there are. Maybe one or two, I'm not sure. There's not many. Why? How come you talked about bus services? Wouldn't it be lovely if you could get a bus to your GP surgery, see your doctor, and your doctor then gives you your drugs and you get your bus back? Wouldn't that be lovely? Why do you have to get a cab from your home to the GP surgery? It then gives you this piece of green paper. Then you have to get a cab from the GP surgery to the pharmacy. Then you have to stand there like this dutifully for 20 minutes. God only knows why, because all they're doing is counting pills. And then you have to get a cab back. So you do 3 cab journeys. So 2. Why do they only give you 28 tablets? I don't know what I'm looking at. I don't know you're on drugs now, I'm sorry. But why do they only give you 28? It used to be 84, didn't it? It used to be 3 months, not 1 month. That's because the pharmacies get paid every time they issue something against a green piece of paper. 3 billion a year, I think is the figure, just on dispensing charges. 3 billion. No wonder the biggest ever private equity buyout in the history of British industry is what? Boots. Taxpayer-funded footfall. What a great business to be in. Boots. Wonderful. You go in there, you pick up your amoxicillin, but you also pick up your raw jelly, your shampoo, your conditioner, and a sandwich. Look, I just use that as an example, and I'm sure there are people who come from education, or people who come from law, or people who set up businesses, who also could introduce policies that on the face of it, to those of us who are ignorant of those particular sectors, appear a bit radical, a bit different. Guess what? Probably they're good ideas. And they're not from this narrow sort of perception of how you do things. They're like over here, or they're over here. They're thought-provoking, they're different because people have lived it, they've experienced it, they've got the wisdom. And that's why I fear we've gone down this path of thinking that being an MP and being in politics is a profession. It shouldn't be viewed like that. It should be viewed as a calling and as a duty, and that we should have people who've done things beforehand before going into it. Please.
You refuse to move into the realms of the over-bureaucracy as well. Are we now to ask what your stance is on Europe? Just get away from Bracknell.
Thank you. I mean, Europe, my position is we need to renegotiate, particularly in view of the fact that they're going to go through a process of increased federalisation. If they want to defend the Eurozone, they've got to become closer towards the United States, like a sovereign country, so that they can move money from state to state. In the same way that money from Texas and go to Vermont, the money from Berlin needs to be able to go to Athens. And that's the whole concept of having a single currency, which is why actually the single currency can't work as it currently constituted, because you need to be able to move money around from relatively rich areas to relatively poor areas. And at the moment you cannot do that, the mechanism doesn't exist. So in order for them to protect the Eurozone and to defend it, they're having to try to create a country, because that's the only way you can do it. I don't think they're going to be able to do it, but that's the intention. If that is their intention, then clearly our position is, and I think the country's position would be, well, that's not what Britain wants to be part of. So if Britain doesn't want to be part of that, it's going to have to renegotiate its membership with that. Now, if you're going to embark upon a renegotiation on anything, be it in business, be it in marriage, the ultimate is you can walk away. The ultimate position to take as part of your negotiations is, well, if I can't get what I want, I'm leaving. I'd rather just not be part of it. That has to be the negotiating position. So you go in and you say, look, I want to negotiate this, and this. I want a different relationship. At which point they will say no. At which point you say, well, if I don't get what I want, or what we want as a country, we're going to leave. At which point they'll say, okay, or they'll say, we can't deal with the second largest economy in Europe leaving the European Union. And a negotiation will take place. If you go into it in a weak way, where they know that you haven't got basically the cojones to press the nuclear button, we're not going to get anything. Now, I would suggest at the moment, as it currently stands, they probably will not give us what we want. So we need to be prepared to consider, to contemplate leaving. I would like to stay within, but not stay within on the current terms. I think the common fisheries policy is a disgrace. I think the common agricultural policy is morally bankrupt and actually creates most of the problems we've got with migration from North Africa and from sub-Saharan Africa, because they can't actually do what they're really good at, which is grow food. Zimbabwe was the breadbasket of Africa. We should want the continent of Africa to be economically successful, vibrant, to pay its way, to feed its people. The perversity is that your taxes, our taxes, pay to subsidise food in the European Union, thereby suppressing agricultural production in Africa to such an extent that we then have to give them money via charity or international development funding to feed them. This is perverse. It's morally bankrupt. It's daft. So I don't like current current position that we find ourselves in. I see no argument for us joining the euro anytime soon. And so consequently, I make my positions, I think, quite clear. We have to renegotiate, and if we don't get what we need, or what we want, or what the British people want, then we'll be leaving. And I don't want to leave, so it's, that's pretty much where we are, isn't it?
Thank you. I find that quite reassuring.
Chris?
Philip, we've got the government locked into a promise on paying a certain percentage of international aid to various countries. Why are we doing this? What would be your view on it?
right, it's one of those cases where you get your personal view and you're going to get the government's position. And I'm a Conservative Member of Parliament and I take the Conservative whip. But I think we live in an age where politicians need to be candid and straightforward and honest about their own personal view, but recognise that there are compromises to be made in terms of being members of a party. So there's my caveat at the start. I was never in favour of ring-fencing any budgets, personally, because I thought that ring-fencing any budget didn't seem to be the right approach, because educating someone is just as important as caring for them, and is just as important as defending the nation, just as important as funding appropriate police services and everything else. I thought everything should be in the mix. When we were making these difficult decisions over reducing public spending, I thought everything should be in the mix, including the NHS. It's my personal viewpoint. Specifically with regards to international development, which was ring-fenced, I am not a huge fan of international development. Okay? I think that it is difficult for us to justify, particularly when the funds in the past, not so much now, in the past, have ended up in the hands of the few, not the many. And I also of the opinion that we need to concentrate on sorting our own backyard a bit more than further afield. I am increasingly supportive of charitable donations to Save the Children, to Oxfam and everything else. And maybe we need to look at tax advantageous schemes to encourage people to donate to international charities, as an example. But do I think that state funding of international development is a good model for government? No, I don't. I would rather that it was part of our whole foreign affairs approach, and that's just my personal opinion. Whether I can do anything about that as it stands, no, I probably can't. But I want you to know what I genuinely feel as my own opinion, because I think it's important you do know that. That's not to say that there are good stories to be told about international development, because there are. But it's not to say that there aren't some programs in some countries that I can be supportive of, because there are. But I don't think necessarily that at the moment, when we have significant debts, significant responsibilities domestically, that this is a priority. The perception of the public is that it's a priority because it is ring-fenced. And I personally am not supportive of that.
First of all, can I apologise for being late, because I come straight from a licensing committee meeting.
Sure.
But I just don't hope this question hasn't already been asked in my absence, but the alarm bells are ringing now about the power supply, which could be in jeopardy in the future. And it appears that we're now going to be held to ransom by Europe again with their stringent rules on carbon emissions, which is making our power stations prematurely redundant. Now, is there anything that David Cameron or the government plan to do to stand up to Europe on this, or is there nothing we can do about it? Because with our economy the way it is, if we're facing the prospect of power cuts and 3-day weeks or whatever, I'm not gaming, but that's a possibility. What is the government's plan of action to to get around this, and to do we stand up to Europe? I mean, is David Cameron prepared to actually stand up and defy Europe and say no, we're not going to abide by these stringent things, or do we just capitulate?
First of all, it's not just Europe. In the Climate Change Act 2008, we have legally binding targets on reducing our carbon emissions, whether we like it or not. That's where we are. And so, there are directives from Europe on unabated coal, which can lead to the closure of coal-fired power stations, which is to a certain extent going to contribute towards the difficulties of keeping the lights on. Now, I'll get party political here, because this is one area where the previous administration, their performance on energy policy was woeful. And they've left us in a situation where we are struggling to adhere to our carbon targets, which are legally binding, at the same time as providing enough power to keep the lights on. And this is to do with a legacy issue. The decision on nuclear power was just pushed back and back and back and back and back. And it's disgraceful, really, if you look at it. I mean, there's a government paper in 2003 basically ruling out nuclear power. By 2008, they're ruling it in again. They're all over the place on energy policy, and we've inherited a situation that isn't an easy, it's not an easy legacy to deal with, because by definition, getting power stations online, particularly nuclear power stations online, takes a long, long time. I mean, it could take, 10 years if you start now. And so trying to deal with our low carbon, legally binding targets at the same time as dealing with the power needs is difficult. Having said that, we can hit a lot of these targets by just burning gas, not coal. Gas is about half the sort of level of carbon emissions. And so I think gas will see us through for the next, for the foreseeable period. But in the medium to longer term, I'm personally of the opinion that we have no choice but to go nuclear and to go nuclear big time. All right? Now this is another example of where releasing me to concentrate on issues that are non-local is of some benefit, I would suggest. I'm in the process of drawing up a memo, a sort of a guide, an article, an essay on nuclear power and the funding of nuclear power. Now we have an ongoing nuclear industry review on the select committee, which I'm going back into next week, and I'm doing my own personal sort of paper on it, and I will be submitting this to number 11, because I genuinely believe that what you're saying is the truth, is that we have a power challenge, we have a potential energy problem on the horizon, particularly as electricity demand goes up, which it will do if we go down the path of electrifying our railways and electrifying our cars and all that sort of stuff. The demand for electricity is going to go up significantly. And I think the only way you can meet that and hit our low carbon targets is by having a series of nuclear reactors around the country. The problem with it is big figures, it's big numbers. We're talking 50, 60 billion pounds commitment, which if you think about it in the light of the fact that we don't have a lot of money at the moment in public spending, it's going to require some difficult decision making vis-a-vis other international development, healthcare spending, and all this sort of stuff. But ultimately, if you don't have the electricity, you can't have the colleges, you can't have the hospitals, you can't have the business parks. If you haven't got electricity, what have you got? So there's a priority, and I think it comes second to nothing really. I don't think it comes, it's so important. And so the final thing I'll say about it is that increasingly as a country we need to become as independent as possible. I think we need to be independent in terms of energy production, food production, everything. I think the next 10, 15 years I think are going to be challenging. And I think a lot of things that we accept as being the norm, like the European Union staying together, like being able to defend ourselves, the migration of people from North Africa and the Middle East, which I think may get worse before it gets better. All of these things are going to put incredible pressures upon countries to be able to actually look after their citizens. And I